Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the third round of the Global Chess League being held here in London. Now, today the top matchups continue, and in the third round of this event, I am playing with the white pieces against the talented Iranian junior, now representing France, Alireza Firouzja. So, let's jump right into the action. I'm playing with the white pieces here, and I start out with the move e4. Alireza plays the Sicilian, I go knight f3, and now we get the move d6. Here I decide to repeat the variation I played against Maxime yesterday with bishop to b5 check, rather than playing the open Sicilian with d4 and going into the classic Najdorf Sicilian. So I play bishop b5. The goal, of course, is to avoid theory and get a simple position, which is easy to play quickly and avoid time pressure. Now, keep this last statement in mind, as it is something I will not do successfully. So we got knight d7. Here I play the move castles. Worth pointing out that bishop d7 was the block that Maxime played the other day, and then I continued with c4. So we get knight d7, I decide to castle, we get a6, bishop e2, knight f6, and here I decide to play the move d3. Now it's worth pointing out that normally after a6, the best move for white is to play this awkward looking bishop d3 line, followed by c3, let's just say b6, bishop c2, and if white can get the bishop on the c2 diagonal, followed by d4, building the classic big white center here, white can potentially be better. So instead, I decide to play this move bishop e2. Now, the idea behind me playing bishop e2 is that I want to follow in the steps of the 5-time world champion Magnus Carlsen with a similar setup that he played very recently in the Chess Champions Tour against Alireza himself. So here we get knight f6, I play d3, and now Alireza decides to play the move b5. Now, I think this is a very good decision by Alireza, because if he were to play the other order with e6, I can play a4, restricting black from playing b5, and after b6, knight d2, bishop b7, f4, I think we end up in a position very similar to the game that was played in the Chess Champions Tour final between Magnus and Alireza just a few days ago. So, Alireza goes b5, now I play knight f d2, e6, and here I go f4. The idea is quite simple. I want to build a bit of a white center here, maybe push e5 or f5 down the road, and I keep my options available to put either the knight on f3 or the bishop on f3 as well. So, Alireza plays bishop b7, I go a4, we get bishop e7, here I go bishop f3, and now we get the move queen to c7. Here I play the move knight to c3, attacking the pawn on b5. We get b4, knight e2, and now Alireza decides to play this move knight to b8, trying to put the knight on the c6 square to cover d4 and e5, whereas the knight on d7 simply covers the e5 square. Now this is really a critical moment in the game after knight b8, where I probably should have used quite a bit of time before playing my next move. I end up playing b3 after a 40-second thing, and this is one of the really dangerous things with playing without increment, from a standpoint that you have to have certain cutoffs where you can think for a certain amount of time, but you also have to know when are the moments that you can afford to take 2 to 3 minutes, and here I miss a big opportunity. Now, what I think I should have played in this position was the move e5 to open up the scope diagonal here. Let's just say black were to play a move like pawn takes, for example. Actually, pawn takes, sorry, I trade the bishops first, and after takes, fe5, knight to d5, for example. Now I can go knight to c4 here. I get this nice bastion on c4 guarded by the pawn. Now the pawn on b4 cannot go back to attack the knight. And with ideas like knight g3, knight f4, and queen g4, everything is coming towards the king side, and I should be a little bit better. Instead, I play b3 pretty quickly, and this is simply an attempt to be creative and play a simple, flexible plan, but it doesn't really do a whole lot. Now, one of the biggest reasons I don't like b3 is that even though I'm going for the classic fianchetto with bishop b2, I can no longer really play on the queen side. What I think I should have played if I didn't play e5 here was probably a move like c3, and after knight c6, for example, maybe I can go d4 to build the big white center here. But even if I don't play d4, let's just say I play a move like king h1, if black ever tries to castle, now I can play knight b3, their d4 ideas as well. I can take on b4 and try to activate on the c file. This is very important because after I go b3, knight c6, bishop b2, and Alireza goes d5, it's very, very hard now to try to open up the queen side, and black is trying to play in the center of the board d5. He can also castle the king out of the center, and I don't really have an easy way to attack. So I go queen e1, Alireza castles, I play queen f2, king b8, rook e1, king 8, and this is sort of a moment where I start to drift. Now I'm trying to play these moves relatively quickly, but at this point I think already here I need to look for something a little bit more concrete rather than simply drifting aimlessly. So I go rook e1, Alireza goes king 8, and here I spend a bit of time, I should say, before playing the move king h1. Now, my initial idea here was to trade the bishop for the knight, and after takes, let's say black were to take with the bishop, I can trade the pawns, win this pawn on c5, and I should be better. But after takes, g takes f6, for example, let's say takes, followed by a move like bishop h5. Black might still be better here, but due to the double pawns on f7 and f6 and the open e-file, I should have easy moves and easy plans to follow. Instead, I go king h1, we get to move h5, and now this is really the last moment where I can follow through with the plan to trade on f6 and take the pawn on c5, and after g takes f6, takes here, I can maybe go h4, and black is still better here, but it's not really clear what the plan is. Instead, I spend way too long in this position after h5 to play the move pawn takes, and knight g3. As you can tell, I spent 3.5+ minutes on this decision, and it is a mistake. So, if I was going to do this, I probably should have played it right away rather than spending 3 minutes, because after takes, I play this move bishop d1, and my idea here is that temporarily I've sacrificed a pawn on f4, but now I have the open e and f files for the towers, I've got the open diagonal for the b, and my knight can even go to f5, and I think it might be quite promising. The big issue is that I've used so much time on the previous two moves that now when Alireza plays queen c7 and I go knight f5, knight g4, and I play queen g3 here, after takes I instantly capture with the pawn, and this is just simply a mistake in my opinion. I do believe that if I had played knight takes queen here, I would have been completely fine in the game, because now the pawn on f7 is under attack, the pawn on g7 is under attack, the pawn on h5 is also under attack, and it's very, very difficult for black to play. Now, the computer still gives black an advantage here after the very unusual looking move bishop to d6, hanging both f7 and g7. If I were to take the pawn on g7 here, black can go rook to h7, and after knight f5, knight takes h2, black is much better here. Would this have happened in the game? Very, very hard to judge. Now, the other line that I can play is rook takes pawn on f7 here, and after rook d to e8, apparently black is better. After takes, bishop g4, hg4, bishop takes g7, and now there's rook e1, rook f1, bishop g3, takes, and rook to e2. Black's apparently better here. I do not think this would have happened in the game. Maybe Alireza would have found it, but this is a very long and forcing line. Hard to know whether this happens. Now, for whatever reason, because I was under 10 minutes here without increment, I started feeling like I had to play quickly. And when I played h takes g3, I simply missed Alireza's next move, which was to go bishop to f6 here, because after I trade, even though black has double pawns on the f file, I have these double pawns on the g file now, which completely offset these double pawns, and now black is simply up a pawn, and at this point, I'm in trouble because I'm also down 3 minutes on the clock. So I play this move knight to f3, which I think is simply a mistake. Computer prefers king g1, a very logical move here, because if black were to play a move like a5, I can maybe even take the knight and play knight e3 here to attack both the pawns on the g4 and f6 squares. So, at this point, I simply play a move quickly here, which is to go knight to f3. Obviously, I'm very cognizant of the time scrambles which have occurred in the tournament so far, with multiple players losing on time. And I sort of had told myself, even prior to this game, and pretty much going to the event, that if I can, I would rather lose a game having 1 or 2 minutes on the clock than get into the clown fiesta where everybody has to make moves with 1 second, pieces go flying, and there is utter chaos. So I play knight f3. I do think, again, if I had more time, maybe I find king g1, maybe I don't, but I have the option to start thinking, whereas at this point, I start going into autopilot and just trying to play quickly to erase the time deficit that I have. So I go knight f3, and now Alireza plays bishop c8, a very, very good move, and I play knight to e7. Another spot where I spend far too long on this move. If I'm going to play knight e7, I should just do it right away, or play a move like knight to h4 here, and I guard the knight on f5. Black is still quite a bit better here, but the game goes on. Instead, I play knight to e7, and now after takes and bishop to e6, I'm simply probably close to loss in a practical game. I'm down 4 minutes on the clock. The wooden shield on e6 guards both of the pawns on f7 and d5, and black can now bring the knight in. I can't really attack this pawn on f6 even, and the rooks are coming off, so it's very, very hard to play. So I play knight h4, Alireza goes knight e3, rook e1, we get the trade, and now he plays the move rook e8. I trade the rooks, and I go rook e1. Now here you might be thinking, well, it can't be so bad. You're only down 1 pawn, being the doubled f pawns here. But the big problem that I have is I cannot really attack any of these kingside pawns. If I were to play a move like rook to f1, for example, black can go bishop g4, and after rook f6, rook to e2, black is creating the classic kebab here. If I take on a6 after king b7, let's just say rook a5, rook c2, black is pushing the p here on the queen side. Everything is very weak. Additionally, my knight is completely dominated here. I don't have any squares available in this position, so black is simply close to winning. So I go rook e1. Now Alireza goes king b7. I go king g1, rook g8, king f2, king c7. And again, after knight f3 and king d6, the big problem that I have here is that if I play rook to h1, in this position, black can simply go bishop to g4, guarding the pawn, and I really don't have any play. I can't attack the pawns, black's king is coming towards the center, and it's just impossible to defend. So I go knight d2, we got bishop g4, I go knight f1, rook g5, and here I play the move knight e3, and now Alireza drops back to e6. Now what I would really love in an ideal world is somehow, if I could, to put the knight on f4. As you'll notice, let's just say the knight's on f1, I cannot get this knight to f4 simply because I don't have a square available. If the knight goes back to e3, for example, just to illustrate, I can't get the knight to g2 because the pawn is in the way here. I also, in this position with knight f1, I can't get the knight to g3 and e2 because this pawn is in the way. So no matter where my knight goes, because of the stacked pawns on the g file, I can never get it to the optimal square on f4. I guess if I have 20 moves to play, for example, maybe I can get something like this, and down the road go knight g1, but even here, black can always play bishop g4, cutting off the knight from getting to e2. So the notion of ever getting the knight to the dream square on f4 is not realistic, and without that possibility, it's probably simply lost. So I go rook h1, Alireza goes king e5. Now the pawn structure also becomes a huge issue as black has a simple entry for the king to get to the c3 square. So I go rook h4, he goes bishop g4, cutting off the rook on the 4th rank and preparing to infiltrate with the king. Here I play the move king e1, we get f5, and now I go rook h1 here, just a move to play in this position, and now we get f4. Here I decide to play knight takes bishop. At this point, it's sort of desperation mode. I know that if I keep spending time, I'm going to lose. I might as well try to simplify right away. Now I could take on f4 here, and after king f4, king f2, king e5, I can go king e1 again. But after f5 with black trying to push this pawn to this f7 pawn all the way up to f4, again, it's a very, very bad position. I think practically speaking, it's simply lost. So I take the bishop. Alireza correctly takes with the rook here. Now this is important to note that he could have taken with the pawn on g4 here, but now after takes and king f2, for example, I am still losing this position, I'm quite sure, but it's not so simple. If you were to go g3 and I get king e2, checking king d2, now I might have a rook f1 here. Probably it's still losing after king g4, but there are some practical chances to maybe save the game. Alireza instead correctly takes with the rook, sacking the pawn on h5, because now this black king is coming to c3, attacking the base of the pawn chain, and here it's all but over. So I go rook to h4 here, desperately hoping that he'll trade the rooks, because now I get an outside pawn, and actually I'm winning this king and pawn endgame, so of course he takes on g3. Now I take on f4, and he goes king c3. And even though material is even here, both sides have 5 pawns on the board here, with the king on c3 attacking all these pawns, and the fact that I can't kick the king away. Say, for example, we got some position like this, is this pawn could magically go back somewhere, then I could play rook c4, checkmating the king on c3. But with the pawn always covering the c4 square here, this king is as snug as a bug in a rug, and with the fact that I can't ever remove it, this is simply lost. So I go rook f2 here, guarding the pawns on c2 and g2. Now Alireza goes f5, I go king d1, f4, and here I play the move a5. Now, I could have tried something like king c1 here, but after d4, very similar to the game, when I go king to b1, now black can simply play rook to e3, temporarily sacking a pawn, and after check, king e2, and rook c1, now black is going to win the pawn on c2 here. Say I go rook f5, takes, and then king b3, rook guards the pawn, checkmate is a threat, and it's all but over. So I go a5, he goes d4, I go rook e2, and now there's a simplification with the move f3. Now I could have gone king c1 again, but now f3 would simply win, because after takes, it's checkmate with rook g1, and if I go rook f3, rook g2, now there's no way to push a pawn here, as the pawns are glued on d3 and d4, and with rook g1 and rook c2, it's also simply over. So I go rook e2, Alireza plays f3, I take, and now he correctly plays the move rook g1, which wins on the spot. Rook takes f3 also, by the way, would... Oh no, rook f3 here would not be good enough because I have rook e5. But he correctly plays rook g1, and now after I block, Alireza is able to trade, because after king c2 and f4 here, there's the crushing move c4, and unfortunately, I have to push this p 4 squares up the board, and with the king on the same square as this b1, or the same rank, I should say, b1 becomes a queen with check. It's all but over. Say I go f5, for example, many ways to win. Simplest is just take, and after f6, b2, f7, black queens with check. If I were to say take on c4 with the pawn, same thing. I simply lose. Black queens with check, and my pawn isn't even 1 square away. It's simply 2 squares away. Extra queen, it's over. And last but not least, if I take this way, there's d3, f5, d2, and now my pawns are nowhere near the end of the board, and with the extra queen, Alireza would win. So I end up resigning the game here after c4. It's definitely a disappointing game for me. I think if I look at the game overall, my time usage at certain moments was not great, but at the end of the day, you have to give credit where credit is always do, and I simply did not play the opening very well. Alireza played the middle game better, and I end up losing. Now, this is a team event, so you can feel very bad if you lose a critical game. In this case, the game did not actually affect the outcome, as several other of my team members lost their games as well, so we lose by a score of, I think, 17-3 or something. It was really, really bad. There were a couple of promising games, but I think that Jonas Buell lost his game. I think BB Sara lost, Dudal lost, I lost. So it was definitely a difficult third round for the American Gambits, but there are still 7 more rounds to go. So if we can just get back on the winning streak, good things can still happen. All right, so a disappointing loss for us. Now we're going to move to the next match featuring Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, also known as MVL, playing as the 5-time world champion Magnus Carlsen. Now, much like me, Magnus is off to a bad start. He drew the first game against Vichy. He lost the heartbreaker yesterday in the mad time scramble against Alireza Firouzja, and today he's hoping to get off the losing streak with a win. So Maxime has the white pieces, and he plays the move E4. Magnus plays D6. We get D4, Knight F6, Knight C3, and the move E5. Now, this opening system, of course, is known as the Philidor, but there's a very important point, which is that the team strategy in this competition is a little bit different, because the wins with white count for 3 points and a win with black counts for 4. And Magnus here, not only is he trying to play something unusual to keep the game going, but it's clear that he's viewing this as a situation where he wants to try to play a little bit more on the dubious edge, so that if he can swindle his way out of it, like he always does, if he wins, he will most likely win the match for his team. So we get Knight F3, Knight BD7, Maxime plays Bishop C4, we get Bishop B7, castles, A4, C6, Rook E1, and now we have the move H6. Now, this is all pretty standard theory. This opening's been around for a very, very long time. What Black is hoping to do here is stay very flexible, maybe go Rook E8, take, and play on the file. Maybe you want to play on the queen side as well. Maybe you also want to play in the center of the board. So many different plans, and in a rapid game, it can pay off in a bigly way. So we got the move A5 from Maxime. Magnus plays Rook E8, we got the move D5, now we have B5 here, and Maxime plays move Bishop B3. Now keep in mind, in the game of chess, you do not have to automatically play the move and peasant here. If you take, Black would take with the knight, attacking the bishop and the pawn in the center at the same time. And with D's knight so well placed, Black should be doing quite well. So Maxime goes Bishop B3, Magnus takes, we get takes, Bishop B7, and now we have the move Bishop E3, finishing the development as the bishop spies the pawn on A7. Here Magnus plays move A6, and this is a slight mistake. Computer actually says that Black should trade everything off on D5 first, and after takes, now A6 would be a little bit better, as Black can reroute the knight to F6 and then try to push the pawn forward to D5. So instead, in this position, Magnus goes A6, but now Maxime is able to play his move Bishop to B6, which is a very good move, because after takes, Rook B8, and Queen D3, now White has a bastion with the knight on B6 that's guarded by the pawn. It sort of tries to prevent Black from playing D5, and White can finish the development with Rook D1, putting the rooks on the E and the D files. So Magnus goes Queen C7. Now we get the move Knight to H4 here. Maxime is aiming to put the knight on F5 or G6, especially because he has this bishop lined up on the long diagonal. So Magnus goes Bishop F8, and now Maxime decides to play this move C3 here, and this is a slight mistake according to the computer. Now, it's worth pointing out, computer would have preferred the move knight to F5, and after G6 here, trying to kick the horse, Queen G3, King H7, Queen H4, Queen to D8 guarding the horse here, Knight to E3. White is actually better due to the weakness on F7, and if Black were to play a move like, I don't know, King G8, now White can maybe even go Knight G4 here. With all these weaknesses on the king side, especially on the diagonals here, White is much better. However, this is a rapid game. Of course, you have to figure out the right moments to use your time. It's not always easy, and Maxime instead plays the move C3. Now Magnus correctly plays the move D5, and this is a very, very important and thematic pawn sacrifice from the greatest player of all time, because without D5, Black would be in real trouble. Now, the reason that Black would be in trouble here is that White simply is gripping this D5 square, and again after Knight F5 just to set up a point. If White can get D's knights covering the D5 square after here takes and Bishop D5, you're going to get the knight to D5 and have this great bastion where the knight can never be kicked out of D5, and White is positionally winning. So it's very, very dangerous for Black here. And when Magnus goes D5, this is a great pawn sack because now he opens up the scope for the B. He can try to bring the rooks to the center. And even though White is still better here, it's going to require very, very precise play. So Maxime takes with knight, we get takes, and now Magnus plays the move knight takes, we get pawn takes, and here, surprisingly, Magnus plays the move queen c4, which is oddly enough a mistake. Now, the computer wants rook b to d8, and the reason here is that now you're pressuring the pawn, but after, say, white goes rook a d1, and you get bishop c5, suddenly the bishop is on the diagonal, you're trying to push in the center of the board, and this knight is a little bit out of play on h4. So instead we get queen c4 here, and now Maxime plays move queen e4. Now the computer actually thinks that after takes, and rook e2, let's just say black goes rook b5, attacking all three juicers at the same time. Now white can play knight f5, sacrificing the pawn back, and after knight e3, rook c5, rook a4, rook c8 guarding the pawn. Now after rook d2, apparently white is significantly better simply because these rooks are tied down to the pawn on c4, and white now has an open file for this other rook. You can create kebabs and all kinds of threats to boot. So Maxime instead plays move queen c4. Again, when you look at the time situation, Maxime is down nearly 4 minutes on the clock with no increment. You sometimes have to make these decisions. You can't think that long. And it is perhaps one of the big drawbacks of the format is that the quality of play will go down as players get lower and lower on time. So we get queen e4 instead here. Maxime trying to keep this b file closed so the rook cannot become active. Magnus goes rook d8, we get rook a d1 here, guarding the pawn on d5 from being captured, and now the move rook b c8 is played by Magnus. Here Maxime goes knight f5, we get g6, and now Maxime has to trade the queens on c4, and we get this move b takes c4. Now it's very interesting to note that even Magnus, the greatest player of all time, he captures the wrong way on c4. Now remember, earlier Magnus was definitely going to take with a rook on b8 because it was forced, but here the computer actually thinks that rook takes c4 is a better line, because after knight e3 and rook a4, now the pawn on a5 and the pawn on d5 are weak. After rook a1 to guard the pawn, black can simply trade the rooks and go bishop c5 here, pressuring the knight and the pawn. And if you play rook d1, now black has f5, followed by e4, f4, and bringing the king to the center of the board. And white's extra pawn is pretty much useless here. And I actually think if this position were to occur, very, very good chances that Magnus would win this game. Instead, we get pawn takes, knight to e3 is played, we get rook to c5 here, and now the move knight g4 is played by Maxime. Now, I love this move knight to g4 from the standpoint that it simplifies the position, but the computer here actually thinks that Maxime should have gone for the same plan as a few moves back with rook to a1 here, and the idea of rook to a4 after rook b8. I think it's rook to e2 here, followed by rook to a4, and again, after h5, rook a4, rook c8, rook to d2 here. White is simply up a pawn on d5 trying to push it, and black's rooks are tied down to the pawn on c4 once again. Instead, Maxime plays the move knight g4, and I understand this decision here. He's down a minute and a half on the clock. He wants to get some clarity before he gets too low on time, and Magnus plays the move e4. We got knight to f6 here. Computer, by the way, still thinks knight to e3 with rook a1 and rook a4 is good, but at this point, Maxime understandably plays knight f6, checking the king. We get king g7, knight takes e4, and now we have rook takes d5, takes, and white has to go g4. Now, Maxime would have loved to have played rook a1 guarding the pawn, but actually here, white now runs serious risk after f5. Knight has no squares really available here except for the g3 square. So after knight g3, rook to d2, now black has the kebab on the second rank. You have bishop c5 to attack the pawn on f2, and this knight is very, very passive, and if anybody is better here, it is Magnus with the black pieces. So we get g4 here. This way f5 is less effective. Magnus plays f5, we get takes, knight g3, and now we have the move rook takes a5. Now at this point the game is trending towards a draw. Both sides have the same number of pawns on the board. If anybody's better, it's probably still white, but with time getting low and the weaknesses on the queen side, very hard to see any way to create an advantage. So we get king g2. Now Magnus plays king f7. We get knight f1 here. Maxime trying to reroute the knight to d2 or e3, similar to those previous variations, by the way, where if you could get knight d2, rook c5, rook a1, a5, and rook a4, now white would be close to winning once again, as now, with only one rook on the board, there's no way to guard the pawn on c4. So Magnus plays rook b5. We get the move rook to e2. Now the move f4 is played here. A nice move by Magnus trying to restrict the horse from jumping to either e3 or g3. You can't go to d2 either because then you lose the pawn on b2 and the knight is simply pinned. Here Maxime goes rook to e4. We get takes, king e8, rook takes c4. And at this point, white has one extra pawn. White has 3 pawns, black has 2 pawns. But due to the pawns being all over the board, these pawn islands, 1, 2, 3 pawn islands, black having an outside pawn, this still should be a draw with correct play. So we get the move king to d7 being played here by Maxime in this position, and now after king to d7, we get this move knight to e3. After knight to e3 is played, we get a5, Maxime goes rook a4, we get bishop c5, and now we have the move king f3. Here Magnus plays rook b3, we get takes, and with one less pawn on the board, it's abundantly clear that unless Magnus Carlsen gets too low on time or simply makes a blunder, this will be a draw. So we get rook to a6, bishop d6, stopping Maxime from winning the pawn, and now he goes h4. Here Magnus plays the move rook to c5, stopping both knight f5 or the pawn push to h5 as well. And now we get the move knight g4. Magnus plays check, and we get the move king g2. Worth pointing out, king e4 would be a mistake. It's still probably good enough to draw, but after rook c4 check, if you go king f5, there's rook to f4, and it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time, as you can't slide the king over, the rook is guarded, and after king g6 takes, now black will probably have great chance to win in the scramble. Additionally, if you go back to f3 here, there's rook f4 check, king g3, and now black has rook to a4 check, creating the fossil. King is in check, rook is under attack. White can sack and play knight h6 and make a draw, but this definitely is not what you want. So we get king g2, rook c4, knight takes h6, and now Magnus plays the move bishop c5. And this is really the last moment where Magnus could go wrong. If he were to play rook takes pawn, white can sack the rook with rook takes bishop, and after takes knight f5, you fork the king and the rook at the same time, and with a knight and a pawn versus the king, this is a very easy win. Magnus instead goes bishop c5 here. Now we get the move h5. If white were to play knight f5, there's rook f4, attacking the knight and the pawns all at the same time here, and black draws easily. So you get h5, rook h4, f3, takes, knight g4, and now Magnus plays bishop g4, bishop d4, trying to dominate the horse on the g4 square in this position. Maxime goes f4, we get rook b5, king f3, and now we have rook b4. Now, one of the great things, in my opinion, about this game is when you look at the clock. Magnus here is 2 minutes, Maxime is 55 seconds, so we're not going to end up in a situation where this game will be decided by a flag. If the player's at 20 seconds or less, very, very high chance that we end up in a mad scramble. We get king e4, Magnus checks, we get king f5, bishop to d2, a nice move attacking the pawn on f4. Knight e5 check is played, we get king c7, knight d3, rook d4, another move to attack the knight and the pawn at the same time here. And now rook a3 is played by Maxime. Here Magnus goes king d6, and now Maxime plays the move rook to b3 here and offers Magnus a draw, I believe, or maybe it was the other way around. At any rate, at this point, the game ends peacefully with the correct result, with the game being drawn rather than some kind of massive clown fiesta. So Magnus draws this game. On one hand, you could say it's good. He was in some danger early, but still, he has 2 draws and a loss in the event, which is probably not the score he was looking for. That being said, I believe that his team, the SG Pipers, would go on to win their match, barring something crazy, although the match is ongoing. And it's all's well that ends well for Magnus's team in this third round. So, what does this mean? Magnus's team, assuming they won this game, and I guess I can check very briefly. I can pull up the board. Apparently, I guess I don't have it. Assuming they win this match, and I could be wrong, hopefully I'm not, they will have 2 wins and 1 loss. They're definitely in the hunt to qualify for the grand finals at the end of the event. So, for Magnus, all's well that ends well with the draw. 2 draws and a loss. Same score that I have after my loss. Say both of us having lost to Alireza in this event so far. And that's that. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed the recap from the third round of the Global Chess League being held here in London. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below. And we'll be back with a recap after I play 2 games tomorrow. 2 against the both 5-time world champions in this field, Magnus Carlsen and Vishwanathan Anand from India. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon. Keep it real. Bye.